Hello everyone, this is Akash from Easy Webinars. Today I'm gonna talk about the surgical anatomy of tongue. The tongue is a mobile muscular organ in the oral cavity which bulges upward from the floor of the mouth, and its posterior part forms the anterior wall of the oropharynx. Essentially, it's a mass of skeletal muscle covered in mucous membrane, and this muscle mass is separated into the right and left halves by a midline fibrous septum. Tongue is separated from the teeth by a deep alveolo-lingual sulcus, which is filled by the palatoglossal fold or arch posterior to the last molar tooth. Now, what are the functions of this tongue? It comes under the domain of taste, speech, mastication, and deglutition. As the shape of the tongue being conical, it is elongated postero-anteriorly and patterned dorso-ventrally, with its external features exhibiting a root, lip, and a body. The root of the tongue is attached to the mandible and hyoid bone by the muscles. It is because of this attachment that the tongue is not swallowed during deglutition. The nerve and vessels of the tongue enter through this root, and the tip is the free end of the tongue which comes into contact with the central incisors. The body, the bulk, as you see in the slide, of the bulk of the tongue between the root and the tip of the body. It has dorsal and ventral surfaces and right and left lateral margins. This is the body of the tongue. So, the dorsal surface is convex on all sides, which is divided by a V-shaped sulcus, the sulcus terminalis, into two parts: the anterior two-thirds or the oral part, and the posterior one-third or the pharyngeal part. The apex of the sulcus terminalis is marked by a blind foramen, the foramen sepum, which indicates the point of origin of the median thyroid diverticulum, or the thyroglossal duct in the embryonic life. The features differ markedly in the oral and pharyngeal parts. The oral parts present features like the median furrow representing the bilateral origin of the tongue, the large number of papillae that could be seen. The pharyngeal part presents a large number of lymphoid follicles which together constitute the lingual tonsil. A large number of mucus and sweetest glands could be seen. The oral and pharyngeal parts of the tongue are different in their embryonical origin. Mucosa oral tooth develops from the first and second pharyngeal arches, while that of the pharyngeal parts develops from the fourth and third pharyngeal arches, which will be discussed later. The oral part, the dorsum of the oral part presents a shallow median groove or furrow. The mucous membrane is moist and pink and appears velvety due to the presence of numerous papillae. The furring or coating of tongue bears no relation in digestive disturbances as generally thought, but it's usually due to smoking, respiratory tract infections, fever, or any other oral infection. Now, papillae of the tongue. They are nothing but the projections of the lamina propria, the corium of mucous membrane covered with epithelium. There are four chief papillae: the valate papillae, filiform papillae, fungiform papillae, papillae. The valate papillae, known as circumvalvate papillae, are the largest, millimeter in diameter, and vary in number from 8 to 12 and are arranged in a V-shaped row in front of the sulcus terminalis. papilla, papilla is like the truncated cone surrounded by a circular sulcus on its palm of Ceres gland. The papillae palm. The terminalis from papillae with sharply pointed tips. Filiform papillae are located abundantly on the dorsum of tongue and are largely responsible for its velvety appearance. The fungiform papillae are the red, rounded, round-headed, and a narrower base, mostly at the apex and margins of the tongue, while same are scattered over the dorsum of the tongue. They are visible discrete pink pinheads. As you could see, this is the foliate papillae, this is the valate papillae, the filiform ones and the fungiform ones. And the foliate papillae are inconstant vertical grooves and ridges near the margin in front of the sulcus terminalis, and they are more prominent in the tongue of the rabbits and quite rudimentary in the human beings. The foliate papillae. So the pharyngeal part, that is the dorsum of the pharyngeal part, faces posteriorly and forms the base of the tongue. The base of tongue constitutes the anterior wall of oropharynx and can be inspected only by the use of a mirror or by a downward pressure on the tongue with a tongue spatula. The mucous membrane over the dorsum of pharyngeal part is devoid of papillae. It, however, appears uneven due to the presence of numerous lymphatic follicles in the underlying submucosa. These follicles are collectively termed lingual tonsil. Seen in the slide. The mucous membrane in this part is continuous with the mucous membrane covering the palatine tonsil and the pharynx. Posteriorly, it is reflected onto the front of the epiglottis as median glossoepiglottic fold and onto the lateral wall of pharynx as lateral glossoepiglottic folds. The space on each side of the median glossoepiglottic fold is termed as the epiglottic vallecula. The ventral surface of the tongue, situated in the oral cavity only, the mucous membrane lining this surface is thin, smooth, and purplish. It is reflected onto the floor of the mouth. The under aspect of the tongue presents the following features: something like the frenulum linguae, deep lingual veins, and the pica fimbriata. The frenulum linguae is a median fold of mucous membrane connecting the tongue to the floor of the mouth. Deep lingual veins are seen through the mucous membrane on either side of the frenulum linguae, but the lingual nerve and the lingual artery are medial to the vein but not visible. This pica fimbriata is a fringed fimbriated fold of mucous membrane lateral to the lingual vein, directed upwards and medially towards the tip of the tongue. If frenulum extends too far towards the tip of the tongue, it is called as a tongue tie. It inhibits normal movements of the tongue and may interfere with normal speech. This can be corrected by cutting the frenulum linguae surgically. Certain drugs, which are lipid soluble, can diffuse through this thin mucous membrane lining the sublingual region of oral cavity and can be quickly absorbed into the circulation. A leading example is nitroglycerin or the isosorbitol dinitroglycerate, a vasoconstrictor used in cases of angina pectoris. The drug is placed under the tongue. Generally, a tablet R is less than where in less than 1 minute it dissolves and passes through thin oral mucosa into the lingual veins. Carcinoma of tongue is common, which involves lateral margins of the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. The relative frequency of various sites of involvement are the anterior two-thirds with 64%, with the lateral margin 47%, and the ventral surface and the frenulum linguae around 9%, with the dorsum 6.8% and the hip 7.5%, and the posterior one-third with 20%, and posterior most, that is the faciolingual part, with 6% of relative frequency of the carcinoma of tongue. The muscles of the tongue. The tongue is divided into symmetrical left and right halves by a median fibrous septum which separates the muscles into two sides. Each half of the tongue contains 4 intrinsic and 4 extrinsic muscles, where the intrinsic muscles are superior longitudinal, inferior longitudinal, the transverse, vertical, and the extrinsic muscles are the genioglossus, hyoglossus, styloglossus, and the palatoglossus, where the intrinsic muscles are within the tongue and have no attachment outside the tongue, whereas the extrinsic muscles take origin from structures outside the tongue and enter the tongue to be inserted in it. The superior longitudinal muscle is located beneath the mucous membrane, and it shortens the tongue and makes the dorsum concave. The inferior longitudinal is located close to the inferior surface between the genioglossus and the hyoglossus, as you can see in the slide. This is the genioglossus muscle, and this is the hyoglossus muscle. The transverse muscle is located, it extends from the median septum to the margin, which makes the tongue narrower and elongated, and the vertical intrinsic muscle is located at the border of the anterior part of the tongue, which makes the tongue broad and flattened. Now the extrinsic muscles, the genioglossus, which is a hand-shaped muscle, it originates from the superior genial tubercle and inserts into the whole of the tongue, and its fibers radiate from the tip of the base and the hyoid bone, where the lowest fibers gets inserted. The action, this genioglossus is something like the protrusion of the tongue when acting together with its counterpart of the opposite side. The hyoglossus, a flat parietal muscle, originates from the greater partner and adjacent part of the body of hyoid. The insertion of this hyoglossus is somewhere around the side of the tongue. It is the posterior half between the styloglossus laterally and the inferior longitudinal muscle medially. It acts by depressing the sides of the tongue and makes the dorsal surface convex. The styloglossus muscle, something like an elongated slip, as you could see in the slide. It originates from the tip of the styloglossus, as the name suggests, an adjacent part of the stylohyoid ligament. It inserts into the side of the tongue. It is deviated posteriorly with the fibers of its hyoglossus. It draws the side of the tongue upwards and backwards. The palatoglossus, a slender slip of muscle which originates from the oral surface of the palatine aponeurosis of the palate. It gets inserted into the side of the tongue at the junction of its oral and pharyngeal parts, where it acts pulling up the tongue and approximates the palatoglossal arches.
ஏய் ஒன்றும் கேட்கலடா.
Movements of the tongue and muscles
1654
releasing them are
ஓகே ஓகே ரைட்.
act like protrusion is produced by the genioglossus muscle of both sides acting together, which is the most important movement. Retraction is done by the styloglossus muscle of both sides acting together. The depression is by the glossus muscle of both sides acting together. The elevation of the tongue is done, that is the posterior one-third is done by the palatoglossus muscle of both sides acting together. Changes in shape is done by the intrinsic muscles. Genioglossus is also called the safety muscle of the tongue because two genioglossi form the bulk of the tongue and are responsible for the protrusion of the tongue. If these muscles are paralyzed, tongue will fall back into the oropharynx and obstruct the air passage, causing choking and death. For the same reason, during anesthesia, the tongue is pulled forward to clear the air passage. Clinical testing of the hypoglossal nerve is done by the genioglossi, which are commonly used for clinical testing. The muscles of both sides acting together protrude the tongue, whereas a single muscle deviates the tongue to the opposite side. Therefore, when the patient is asked to protrude his tongue, the tongue deviates to the paralyzed side, that is the side of the lesion of the hypoglossal nerve.
So far, we have completed with the muscles of the tongue, and we will continue with the arterial supply in our next session. Thank you. Good day.